Hello everyone. Since I couldn't find anything useful on the internet about the language policies, so I decided to make a video by myself, and I'm gonna tell you about policy-based approach. So language policies for multilingual families refer to the strategies and approaches that families use to support their children's language development. A language policy can help families to ensure that their children have access to multiple languages and that their language skills are developed in a supportive and enriched environments. So there are some steps families can take when creating a language policy. And we are not talking now about the language policies themselves. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. So far, we are talking about steps that you should consider when picking up the language policy. So first step is assess the language needs. It's important for families to assess their children's language needs and to understand their goals for the children's language development. That can help family determine what resources or support they need to provide to their children. So how important your home language is for you. Personally, what do you want? Are they going to be a fully proficient, halfway proficient, only verbal but no literacy? All those things you have to consider about the language policy when you pick one. Then another step is that the language policy is to encourage language use. Families can encourage their children to use multiple languages by creating opportunities for them to use language in the meaningful and relevant ways. For example, by reading books in multiple languages, listening to music, or watching movies and TV shows in different languages. The next step is to support language learnings. Families can support their children's language learning by providing resources such as language classes, language learning apps, or language exchange programs. They can also hire a tutor or seek help from family members fluent in different languages. So supporting language learning means that you have to consider what type of resources are available for your family specifically. So if you don't have an opportunity to hire a professional tutor, maybe you should consider an exchange program between, those work and travel kind of students, or exchange students from different countries that speak that language. So that's what you may think about. Then create a language-rich environment. So the next step is to create a language-rich environment. Families can create a language-rich environment by surrounding their children with the language in all forms, including books, media, and the conversations. So the next step is, once you pick the policy, be consistent. It's important for families to be consistent in their language policy. That means that they should consistently encourage the use of different languages and provide opportunities for language learning. I mean, once you took a decision to study or to keep the home language, we suggest to just stick to that decision, because if you are inspired for 6 months of the year and the other 6 months of the year you don't want to learn your home language or enforce or convince your child to learn that language, then when kids feel when there is no consistency, they don't like it, they feel this as a weakness and they use this. So next time when you are going to be inspired by your desire to reinforce or revisit your home language, they may refuse. They can just say no. Last time you started and you quit that, so why would I do that again now? Because there is a chance that you are not going to continue in a few months, so why would I waste my time on that grammar language? But in the meantime, the next step is, when you pick the language policy, stay flexible. While consistency is important, families should also be flexible in their language policy. They should be open to adjusting their approaches as children's needs change and as their goals for their children's language development evolve. So the language policy is not set in stone, so you change together with your kids. If they grow out of one of the policies, it's okay to just revisit your initial ideas about language policies and approaches to home languages, and to change into something more appropriate. By implementing language policy, families can help ensure that their children have access to multiple languages and their language skills are developed in the supporting and enriched environments. Additionally, by providing support to their children's language development, families can help their children become multilingual, which can have numerous cognitive, social, and cultural benefits. So now let's talk about the types of language policies. There are a few that are super famous and super well known and popular, and there are a few that are not that much known, but we're going to talk about all of them just in case, because some of them are specifically for bilingual households, and some of them are used by multilingual or trilingual households. Let's talk about the bilingual language policies, and the most famous one is one parent, one language, or OPOL, OPOL, I call it OPOL. So the one parent, one language policy is the language policy commonly used by bilingual families to support their children's language development. In this policy, each parent speaks to their child in the different language, in their native language. For example, one parent may speak to the child in English, while the other parent speaks to their child in Spanish. In the same household at the same time, and child knows when he or she speaks to father, he uses English, and when he or she speaks to mother, they use Spanish. And similarly, that applies to the families of the parents. I mean, to the grandparents from both sides. That's the most famous, right? Mom speaks her language, dad speaks his language. The goal of the policy is to ensure that children have access to two languages and that their language skills are developed in a balanced way. The idea is that by hearing two languages from different people, children can learn both languages more effectively and become more proficient in the both languages. Advantages of one parent, one language policy include: so first is the clear language exposure. Children are exposed to two languages clearly and consistently, which can help them learn both languages more effectively. Increase motivation. Children may be more motivated to learn the language that their parents speak, as it is directly tied to their relationship with the parent. And finally, balanced language development. OPOL can provide balanced language development. Children can develop their skills in two languages, which can have numerous cognitive, social, and cultural benefits. Because both languages are used in the home environment, in the natural settings, that's what we call a balanced language development. So one day father is talking about food, another day mother is talking about food. So basically the child can build a very balanced vocabulary with this approach. However, it's important to note that one parent, one language policy may not be the best choice for the families, and that each family should assess their own needs and goals when decided on the language policy. Additionally, one parent, one language policy may not always be feasible, as it can be challenging to maintain it in certain situations, such as when one parent travels or not present for the period of time. So that was one parent, one language. Now we're going to another quite famous policy, which is called the minority language at home, or we call it MLH. The minority language at home policy, also known as MLH policy, is a language policy that supports the use of minority language as a primary language in the home environment. It means that both parents speak that language natively and they use that native language at home. They may not use that language outside of the home, but at home they use this language. This policy is often used by families who wish to maintain and pass on a minority language to their children. The MLH policy typically involves in the following steps. So first of all is determination of the minority language. The family identifies the minority language that they wish to use as a primary language at home. So that can be tricky. So if parents speak different languages, let's say my husband speaks Spanish and I speak Russian, but I sacrifice Russian in honor of Spanish, and we pick one of the languages for home, only one of them, because Spanish is more popular compared to Russian, so why would I bother about passing down the Russian? Because technically Spanish is the second most popular language in the world and it's more profitable, right? No, it's third most popular language in the world, so it's more profitable for the child to know Spanish rather than Russian. So we sacrifice the Russian and use only Spanish at home, or it could be vice versa. So the first step for the families like this to determine which language they are going to use at home, and then encourage of that language use. The family encourages the use of the minority language in the daily activities such as reading, speaking, listening, to maintain and develop language skills. So everything in the household is in that language, as simple as it. So promotion of the language-rich environment. That's another step of this policy. The family creates a language-rich environment that supports the use of the minority language by providing resources such as books, music, and media in that language. So you use books, music, and TV shows or television in that language. I mean, everything is in that language. Support. So that policy also can have a step like a support for the language maintenance and development. The family seeks to support resources. the family seeks support and resources in that language, such as language classes, tutors, to help maintain and develop their language skills. So basically, you not only speak that language at home, but if your goal is to develop literacy in that language, then you have to consider different classes, courses, and investing into development of the literacy. That may include hiring people or maybe enrolling kids into the specialized school. The minority language at home policy aims to ensure that children have access to a minority language and can maintain and develop their language skills in that language. The minority language at home policy can also help families preserve their cultural identity and to pass their language and cultural heritage to future generations. I mean, it does work like that. It does. The kids who spend the household in one of the languages, they do have stronger bonds with the culture as well. It's important to note that the minority language policy at home may not be feasible for all families, that each family should address their own needs and goals when deciding on the language policy. Additionally, the minority language at home policy may require additional resources and support, such as language classes, tutors, and to be successful. So the next policy that I want to talk about is one parent, two language, or OP2L. OP2L. One parent, two languages policy. Good that I'm reading this script because I found a bunch of typos, and that is a plus for my classes. The one parent, two language policy is a language policy that some bilingual families may use to support their children's language development. In this policy, one parent speaks to a child in two languages, altering between those two languages as needed. For example, a parent who speaks both English and Spanish might speak to their child in English 1 minute and then switch to Spanish the next one. That's possible. So you said one sentence in one language and then you switch to another one, so you basically speak two languages. This approach provides the child with exposure to both languages in a consistent and balanced manner. Okay, so there are many other opportunities that you can do with this policy. So you speak two languages, and for instance, half of the day you speak one language, and another half of the day you speak another language. That's also an option. Or one day of the week you speak only one language, and next day of the week you speak another language, but you are the same provider of that language. Advantages of one parent, two languages policy include clear language exposure. Children are exposed to two languages clearly and consistently, which can help them learn both languages more effectively. Increased motivation. Children may be motivated to learn language that their parent speaks, as it is directly tied to their relationship with that parent. And balanced language development. Children can develop their skills into languages, which can have numerous advantages in the cognitive, social, and cultural spheres of the child. However, it's important to note, as you guess, that one parent, two languages policy may not be the best choice for all the families. First of all, each family have to assess the needs and realistically assess the opportunities that are available in this family. Can you maintain both languages at the same level? Additionally, one parent, two languages policy may be more challenging to implement, as it requires a high level of language proficiency in both languages from one parent. So that can be, because science loves when you are a native speaker of one or few languages, or a very proficient speaker of several languages, because they're really concerned about how well you can pass it down. So that's why the science insists that you have to pass down your native language where you're the most proficient. Because if you are not that much proficient and you want to pass down the language that you don't really know much, it can really scrutinize the language development of the child, especially that if it is the only language of the child. So the next policy is non-dominant language without community support. Okay, so that is very similar to the minority language at home. Which I'm gonna skip because okay, so now we are talking about trilingual families. Let me delete this because I don't need it anymore. Okay, so now we're talking about double non-dominant home language without community support. That policy, or I also call it Trilingual, OPOL. This is already a policy for trilinguals. This double non-dominant home language without community support refers to a situation where a family uses two languages that are not widely spoken or supported in their community as prime languages in their home environment. So they're using languages that are not supported by community in their household. And this can make it even more challenging for the family to maintain and develop their language skills in both languages, as there might be limited resources to support available support available for either language. In double non-dominant home language without community support scenario, each parent has a unique native language that is not widely spoken in their community. They each speak their own language to the child, leading to the child's acquisition of 3 languages rather than just 2. An extensive study of this scenario can be found in Hoffman, 1985, who documented the child's acquisition of the English from the community, German from the mother, and Spanish from the father. This is what I wanted to say. So it is exactly our situation that we use non-community languages at home. I speak Russian, others speak Spanish, and English we learn from school. This is a very common situation. It has a very complex name, but I call it Trilingual OPOL, right? Because we outsource each language to each speaker. I speak one, husband speaks another one, and the community speaks third one. Eventually the child becomes simultaneously trilingual. Okay, in this situation, family may face additional challenges such as limited access to resources, as always, difficulty finding people to speak that languages with, and lack of exposure to the languages in their community. These challenges can make it difficult for the family to maintain their language skills and also may impact their children's language development. Despite these challenges, some families choose to maintain their double non-dominant home language to preserve their cultural identity and pass on their languages and cultural heritage to the future generations. It can be important for families to have a plan in place to support the languages, such as seeking out resources and support from other families or organizations to ensure their long-term survival and development. Because the problem of these non-dominant minority languages at home is that when child has 3 languages, eventually one becomes very dominant. Okay, the language where the child spends the most time becomes the most dominant. Okay, and the reality says that my kids spend 8 hours using English and only probably 4 hours, 4 or 6 hours a day she uses is split. That those 6 hours are split between the Russian and Spanish. So you see the difference. That 8 hours of English is way more than if we split 6 between Russian and English, 3 hours in Russian, 3 hours in English. Yeah, that's the main problem. Where the child spends the most time becomes the most predominant language. If you homeschool in language, that this ratio or proportion can be different. That's up to you. So yeah, that was the trilingual OPOL. Non-native parents, or we call that, could be called as artificial bilingualism. In this scenario, both parents have the same native language. So we speak, let's say, both Spanish or both Russians, the predominant language in their community. So we live in we live in Russia and we speak Russian, but we decided to raise a child in English. That's very interesting. So that is called artificial bilingual. However, one parent or both parents speak different language to each other. So we decided to use English as our home language, but we live in completely different environments. Well, there is basically no difference, as I don't know why this thing is separated. This type of policies is separated from minority language at home, because that's exactly the minority language at home that we live in the country and we speak different language at home, and not only at home but anywhere else. So that's kind of overlapping. Basically there is no artificial bilingualism at this point, or the opposite. There is no minority language at home, because anything you are creating artificially is artificial bilingualism or multilingualism. Okay, so this artificial bilingualism was Sanders in 1982, 1988, and Dobke, 1992, documented examples of such situations. Saunders, a native speaker of Australian English, successfully taught his 3 children German in addition to English. Dobke also studied a similar case, observing English and German-speaking families in Austria, where German was not the native language of the parents. Raising children in non-native language can present several challenges for the parents. First of all, lack of fluency. If you're a non-native speaker, I see the difference now. Okay, so I'm wrong about that. Artificial bilingualism. So when you are not, because when we use minority language at home, we use your native language at home, so you're proficient. But when you use the language that you don't, that is not your native, but you're pretty fluent or whatever, then the first challenge is lack of fluency. One of the biggest challenges is the need for fluency in a non-native language, which can make it difficult for parents to communicate effectively with their children. Then the other problem is, of course, traditionally finding resources. It can be challenging to find resources such as books, videos, in language classes in non-native language. Luckily, if your artificial language is English, there's plenty of different resources, as well as in any other language too. Community support. The lack of community support for the non-native language can make it more challenging for parents to maintain and develop their language skills, and may also impact their children's language development. Which is true, and again, depends on the language. If it's very popular language like English, Spanish, you can find tons and tons of different resources in that language. Exposing the child to the language. Another challenge. It can be challenging for parents to find opportunities for their child to hear and speak non-native languages with others. True that, but you can create your own group of supporters. Balancing languages. If the parent also use their native language or other languages in the home, it can be challenging to ensure that the non-native language is used enough to maintain fluency and develop literacy. And here I can tell you one super great secret is called 20%. So it was proven for child to start speaking the language, they need to hear or to be exposed or actively communicate in the target language at least 20% of their time. So if you sleep, it's like, consider that we have 24 hours a day and you sleep 8 hours, another 8 hours you are working, and then if we take out leisure time, which is 8 hours, and use 30% of that time is going to be around 90 minutes. 30% is 90 minutes, right? No. 20% is going to be 90 minutes. So every day the child has to use the language, target language, for at least 90 minutes a day. That ensures that they are going to be fluent in that language, which is insanely difficult to support because we have a 4th language, which was Chinese, and ensure 90 minutes a day, aside from other languages, was absolutely impossible for my family. I could do 30 minutes, 50 minutes, sometimes an hour. If I use just 1 hour, I spend 1 hour a day in Chinese, then I consider the day was successful. But making 90 minutes each day is almost impossible. That's why my kid doesn't speak Chinese yet. Anyways, despite all these challenges, some families choose to raise their children in non-native language as a way to preserve their cultural identity, support multilingualism, or provide their children with additional language and cultural experience. To overcome these challenges, family may seek out resources and support from other families or organizations and create a plan for language use in the home that balances the different languages and provides opportunities for the child to use and develop non-native language. One more language policy, and I'm well beyond, almost like around 30 minutes already talking about this issue. So the next policy that is famous, and you can hear that, is mixed languages. In this situation, the parents are both bilinguals, and one or both parents switch and mix languages with the child. The community may be also bilingual, as is, so for instance, the case in one of the earliest studies of this type of bilingual acquisition, namely Tabure Keller, I don't know how to spell that, who studied the simultaneous acquisition of French and German by the child who was born to bilingual parents in Alsace, a bilingual region of France bordering with Germany. So basically, parents don't limit, they just use the languages as they want, and they can switch languages, and that all helps kids acquire languages anyways, which is backed up by another research that says no language policies guarantee bilingual language acquisition. So basically, child don't need any of the language policies to acquire 2 or more languages. The only condition that is required is consistency of input. So whether it's a structural approach to languages in the house, or it's spontaneous approach like mixing languages, unless the child has exposure to the language, they can acquire that language. That's it. That was the study. And I don't remember who was the author, but I can put these either in the description of the video, or maybe I will find another. I will record another video about that. And finally, my favorite, which is similar to mixed languages, is called 2 languages at the same time. So translanguage, or we call it translanguage. Translanguage is nothing new. It can be a natural way for multilingual people to communicate. Still, as the research focus, it emerged in 1980s in Bangor, North Wales, and Son Williams and his colleagues investigated strategies for learners to use 2 languages, Welsh and English, in the single lesson. So that's my favorite approach. So when you use both languages at the same time, in the same place, the same parent, and everything is at the same. However, a little bit different to the mixed language, because this one is organized versus disorganized. They came up with the Trau Say 2, that's in Welsh, to describe reading or hearing input in one language and writing or speaking about it in another language. So for instance, they had the text in Welsh, but they had to write an essay in English, or the opposite. They had a, let's say, discussion prompt in English, but they had to discuss this topic verbally in Welsh, and vice versa. So reading in one language, discussing in another language. Later the term was translated into English and popularized as translanguaging by their colleague Colin Baker in 2012. The translanguage migrated as and redefined into social linguistics when they started to use it not as a pedagogical approach, but as a description of the processes that bilingual and multilingual individuals have. So that was a situation. Then they took this comfortable term and started to use it in a different, and then in a while, because of the amount of research from social linguistics using this translanguage term, we ended up into a complete redefinition, and now it means that translanguage considers language learning as a dynamic, continuum process that includes speakers negotiating meaning and stresses the learner's active engagement in the language acquisition. In the translanguage approach to language acquisition, the focus is not on acquiring a fixed, standardized version of the language, but on developing the ability to communicate effectively and meaningfully in the range of the contexts and with the range of language varieties, and with the variety of the communicators. The translanguage approach recognized that multilingual learners may draw on multiple languages and varieties in their everyday communication, and that these can be a valuable source for learning. Importantly, translanguage pedagogy demands that multilingual speakers engage in the translanguage do not vacillate between language systems arbitrary, but rather that they do it with the intention and the metacognitive understanding of how their language practices work. That is Kanagaraj 2006. So the point is that the bilingual speaker approaches communication from position of both languages. It's like, let's say you have an idea in your head and you want to say it, but you are lacking vocabulary in your language, but you know a word from another language, you grab that word and you specifically use. Or for instance, when somebody challenges you, how do you translate that into second language? And you have to go through your mental vocabulary database to find the best translation. So basically what this translanguage method means is that you actively ask your kids, how would you say that in a second language? And they shouldn't translate that word to word, but they rather find the equivalent of that phrase in another language. Or for instance, when you ask your kid, okay, pay attention to the structure of the word. Where do you see the root, which is root of the word that is you can find similar in another language. For instance, like with the Latin origin, they are everywhere, or with the Greek origin, you can find those words everywhere in English and Russian and in Chinese, I don't know, everywhere, right? Some words borrowed but then transformed, and you ask child, what does this word remind you? And they start thinking, guessing games, and then you can also engage them in analysis of the texts, and then you can ask them to translate. So we basically engage in metalinguistics, it's called, when you use language to talk about the language, when you use, or metacognition, when you use thinking about your own thinking, that kind of thing. So translanguage is always like, it's according to social linguistics, it's a hierarchy of the use of the languages, when you do not separate them, you do not compartmentalize them, but rather force your child to be like, to pick appropriate, like to swim in those languages like a fish, right? And pick appropriate sentences in appropriate moments, and just mostly feel it rather than using the fixed constructions. Okay, so I've used this approach since the birth with my first child. When we have the same activities, so I knew about that, that you can use both of the languages at the same time, in the same place, in the classrooms, with the different degrees and percentage of the use. And so I use this method always. When we have some activities with the daughter, we could use one language to receive the input, let's say read or watch, and the second language to discuss the input information. So we watched, let's say, video in English, but then we discussed that in Russian. And I also asked her, okay, how would you say this phrase in Russian? How would you say this phrase in Spanish? So I was forcing her to use English in input and to talk about that in different language. I also use a parallel translation of individual terms, word combinations, sentences, paragraphs, whenever I feel that will enhance my daughter's comprehension. Nothing is criminal if you would translate words to your child to just improve comprehension. Nothing. Because some parents say, no, you never translate to your kid. No, you use, I recommend you to use every single available opportunity to just improve comprehension, because it's always about lack of vocabulary and lack of comprehension. So to develop vocabulary and to improve comprehension, you can use any approach you would like to, because the goal worth the means. So the policy reflects better, that policy better reflects multilingual brain behavior, because we have only one center for the languages. Regardless of how many languages they are, one part of the brain lights up. It means like we don't have compartments for French, English, Russian, Chinese. No, we have everything in one place. That's why they penetrate, they leak into each other, and that's how probably many multilingual thinks. Like many multilingual think about languages, like we don't separate them, we mix them. That's the whole point. It's very difficult to separate them, but we try to. Sometimes we stay more consistent, sometimes less consistent, depending on our interlocutors or our communicational partners. So another reason why I use translanguage is that because myself, I cannot stick to one language consistently, even for the half of the day. Because I'm living in the third language environment, right? And I use, let's say, 15 minutes Russian, then another 5 minutes I speak English and switch, and then I can be exposed to Spanish the rest of the day, and back and forth. So I tried many times to stick to one language, but never worked for me. So I just quitted that and decided to do what I do the best. I just use my metacognition. Well, the child is fine, no confusion, nor she acquired language is fine. I also can say that many parents fear using translanguage because the child start mixing or confusing languages, But that is not the sign of actual confusion, but they are rather signs of metacognition or metalinguistics. However, if it is consistent, like mixing is consistent, then for a child it gets difficult to separate languages when it's required. For instance, my parents, they don't speak English, not even a word. And if my child enters their space or visit them and starts mixing up languages, half speaking English and another speaking Russian, I can guarantee you it's not gonna improve their, it does not enhance their communication at all. I would say the opposite. It can really makes it very complex, because my parents don't speak even a word of English. and child at some point understands this, and kids typically pick two positions. I go along and try to use less mixes in the language, or I stick to what I'm doing and let the others bend over me. The second approach, I prefer not to. I mean, that's not an option in our family. From the very beginning, we were insisting on probably depending on the situation, right? If you have bilingual friends, you can be bilingual and mix the language. But if you talk to my grandma, please be consistent and speak only one language at a time. And that worked. It's probably all depends how you teach them from the very beginning. So that's why many parents are afraid of using this method. But it's all about how you set up the initial rules of the house. Multilingual parents believe that two languages do not cause delay or confusion in general, but when it's like up to this policy, normally people try to abstain and avoid that, because it's ideally thinking like the languages do not, but when you see actual kid confusing and mixing languages, it's scary. So but I can assure it all depends on your initial house rules. The translanguage approach is particularly relevant for multilingual and bilingual learners who may have different levels of proficiency in their languages and may use their languages in different ways in the different contexts. But taking a translanguage approach, educators and parents can support multilingual learners in developing the skills and strategies they need to be successful communicators in the many languages and in the variety of settings. So I have read you my excerpt from the course because I couldn't find anything relevant. They typically very short and very inconsistent or maybe not scientific, which is not appropriate for this class. Therefore, let me recap. So when you pick the language policy, you have to consider several things. One of them is assess the language needs. Do you really need the child to be bilingual or multilingual? Then think about how you're going to encourage language use. Is it going to be the classes? Is it going to be the family or visits to parents? I don't know. Then how are you going to support language? Do you have access to those resources from the place where you are? Do you have an opportunity to travel to your relatives in another country? And then be sure to create a language-rich environment, stay consistent, but at the same time flexible. So there are that is things that you need to consider even before the beginning of the policy. And then we have several types of language policies at home. One parent, one language, that is OPOL. The minority language at home, which is MLH. One parent, two languages. This is OP2L. Double non-dominant language without community support, which is trilingual, OPOL. And non-native parents or artificial bilingualism. The complex one is the mixed languages and two languages at the same time, or translanguage. So thank you for listening to this video, and I hope that you find this I hope I clarified a little bit the situation with the language policies. However, when we talk about language policies for second or for bilingual families, for multilingual families, there is a lot of speculation. I would suggest you start, my personal advice, try them all, see what sticks to you, because probably you will start from OPOL in the early childhood, but then will change to the mixed languages and two languages at the same time as your child grow, because it's easy to maintain that one language, one parent policy when the child is small, but once they have opinion, you have to adjust yourself too. So again, thank you for listening, and I hope to see you in the next class.